They told us Brexit was about sovereignty. They promised you control of your laws, your money, and your borders. And what they didn't tell us was that for thousands of ordinary British citizens living in EU countries, Brexit would come knocking not as a friendly change, but as a deportation order, a rejected visa renewal, or a silent disappearance from a country they once considered home. Since the 1st of January 2021, when the Brexit transition period officially ended, at least 4,155 British citizens have been ordered to leave the European Union, with 1,915 actually returned during the same period. And if you expand the data to include Norway and Switzerland, which are part of the Schengen area, the numbers increase to over 5,015 expulsion orders and 2,140 returns. And these are not abstract statistics. These are people, retirees in Spain, language teachers in Sweden, families in the Netherlands, who suddenly found their legal residency status challenged, revoked, or entirely denied. And the reasons behind these orders are often not dramatic. Most of them stem from missing paperwork, staying a few days too long, failing to meet arbitrary administrative deadlines, or being unaware of new requirements that never existed for Brits before Brexit. What once was a continent of open movement became a landscape of legal uncertainty, and for many, it hit without warning and without mercy. And the root cause is simple: the loss of EU citizenship. With Brexit, British citizens ceased to be EU citizens, and therefore they lost the right to live, work, or study in the EU without visas or permits. And this shifted them overnight from people with rights to so-called third country nationals, treated legally no different than someone from Paraguay or Pakistan. The withdrawal agreement was meant to soften the blow, allowing those already legally residing in an EU member state before the end of 2020 to remain. But the way that agreement was implemented varied drastically from country to country, with consequences that have been anything but fair or predictable. Yeah, there you can see sovereignty in EU member states. Who would have thought that? But some countries like Spain and Italy adopted a more lenient or declaratory system. They assumed you had rights if you met the conditions, and they gave you time and flexibility to regularize your status. Other countries, notably Sweden and the Netherlands, adopted a constitutive system. This meant British residents had to actively reapply for their rights, sometimes through complex digital systems, often within tight deadlines, and always with the risk of rejection. It's no surprise that Sweden and the Netherlands topped the list for British expulsions. Sweden alone accounted for over 1,300 expulsion orders, and more than 700 of which led to actual returns. The Netherlands issued over 1,160 expulsion orders, although just 200 led to actual removals. In both countries, the key problem was paperwork, not crime, not fraud, not any threat to public safety, but simply the failure to navigate new bureaucratic systems created by Brexit. A missed deadline, a misunderstanding of visa rules, an old passport, an invalid residence card, and suddenly the place you've called home for years becomes a country where your presence is illegal. Take Gregory in Sweden, who had lived there for over 20 years. He missed the application deadline because he was between jobs and lacked the documentation required. Despite 2 decades of residence, he was ordered to leave, and his case is not unique. It's emblematic of a broader reality. Post-Brexit Europe is a legal minefield for British citizens, especially for those who believed their residency was secure and didn't rush to swap their old papers for new permits. The number of expulsion orders fell slightly over time, suggesting that the initial wave of confusion and missed deadlines may have been a one-off, but the system remains unforgiving. Between January and September 2023, 825 expulsion orders were issued across the EU, and 470 people were returned. These numbers may seem small compared to the population, but for those affected, the impact is life-altering. And the disparity between the number of orders and actual returns shows a deeper issue. Many either left voluntarily before enforcement or somehow managed to regularize their status. Others, however, were swept into removal procedures that carried no mercy for lateness, ignorance, or honest mistakes. Some countries enforced rules with surgical strictness. Malta issued over 115 expulsion orders, largely for overstaying the 90-day visa-free limit. France expelled more than 100 people between 21 and 24, often citing threats to public order, which can range from criminal behavior to more opaque criteria. And Danish border guards turned away British travelers whose passports were technically valid but didn't meet Denmark's strict interpretation of Schengen entry rules, particularly the 9-year and 9-month policy. Austria deported over 130 British nationals, often for failing to present residency documents or not meeting the standard for long-term stay. Meanwhile, Belgium enforced its registration deadline with quiet intensity. If you didn't register by the end of 2021, your previous residency became invalid, and by early 2022, your legal status expired. In Latvia, Finland, and Poland, the numbers were smaller, but the stories were the same. Bureaucratic hurdles, unclear communication, and the burden placed entirely on individuals to stay within the rules of a new, rapidly shifting legal environment. Yeah, but those countries didn't vote to leave the EU. And then there are countries that didn't see a single British expulsion. Ireland, thanks to the Common Travel Area Agreement, continues to treat Brits as they always did, like neighbors. And Spain and Italy have also shown remarkable restraint. Officially, neither country reported expulsions of British nationals during the reporting period. And why? Well, partly because they use more pragmatic approaches, but also because their systems assume good faith unless proven otherwise. And let's be honest, they want the British pensioners and second homeowners spending money in their economies. Yet, even in these countries, the 180-day Schengen rule still applies. Overstay that window, and your sunny escape in Malaga could become a legal headache. And let's talk about terminology. Ordered to leave doesn't necessarily mean you were dragged to the airport. It often means a formal letter or administrative act telling you your presence is unlawful. You may have time to appeal, you may have a chance to reapply, but you're now in the system, and I don't mean it in a good way. And return means you left. Maybe you were forced, maybe you left to avoid trouble. In either case, you are gone. And refused entry means you never made it in. A border guard checks your passport, checks your return ticket, and if anything looks off, you are told to take the next flight back. No fanfare, no sympathy, just rules. The complexity lies in how different member states interpret and enforce those rules. Some show leniency. Some follow the book with zero flexibility. The EU permits national discretion in assessing things like public order or valid residence, and that discretion has created a patchwork of enforcement across the continent. It's entirely possible to be legal in Portugal and illegal in Belgium based on identical behavior. And for ordinary people, that's a nightmare. But that's sovereignty of countries. Even those who tried to do everything right sometimes fell through the cracks. Some applied late, citing health issues, caregiving duties, or administrative delays. And many were rejected. And why? Because some governments didn't consider their reasons sufficiently compelling. And this rigid approach has transformed legal grey areas into legal traps. And all of this stems from Brexit, we must not forget that one. From the simple fact that the UK chose to leave a system that gave its citizens unprecedented freedom of movement. And now, Brits face the same hurdles in Europe as any other third country national. Visa requirements, residency permits, proof of income. What else is there? Health insurance, no criminal record, and a lot of patience. Some might say this is just the natural consequence of leaving the EU. And that's legally true. But politically, morally, and socially, the consequences are profound. And British citizens were sold a vision of liberation. But what many got was limitation. They weren't supposed to be the collateral damage of Brexit, at least they thought so. And yet here they are, ordered out, turned away, and left to deal with the fallout. The Brexit dream of national sovereignty has resulted for many in personal instability. And for all the talk of taking back control, many Brits living abroad have discovered just how little control they now have, and how much control EU member states still have. And what's next? As temporary residency permits expire, new challenges will arise. New rules, new deadlines, new chances to fall foul of a system that is increasingly automated, unforgiving, and sometimes opaque. And this isn't over. It's only just beginning. And unless future negotiations or legal reforms address these issues head-on, more people will find themselves suddenly unwelcome in countries they once called home. Brexit may be done in the eyes of some Brexiteers, but the human consequences are still unfolding, one expulsion order at a time.